The glass was the only thing between us. I was staring into her eyes, and she wasn't blinking. She just kept that wide, fixed grin, her face pressed so hard against the window that her nose was flattened and white. "Hello?" she whispered, the sound vibrating through the pane. Then she started to bang. Not a knock, a rhythmic, heavy thudding, like she was trying to tenderize the air. But let's go back. Back to when the house was silent, and the only thing I had to worry about was the smell of lavender and old floorboards. My grandmother, Martha, had finally taken that trip to Florida with her friends from the parish. She'd been anxious about leaving the house empty, so I offered to stay. It's a classic craftsman home, creaky, full of character, and usually very peaceful. I was staying in the guest wing, the same room my brother and I used to share. 2 twin beds, floral wallpaper, and a window that looks out over the side garden. Before settling in, I did the rounds. I'm not usually paranoid, but being alone in a house that size makes you hyper-aware of every latch. Front door, deadbolted. Back door, locked. Windows, shut. It was barely 10 p.m., but the neighborhood was already dead. I climbed into the bed by the window, scrolling through my phone, the soft blue light the only glow in the room. You know that feeling when you're so relaxed your ears start to ring? That's when I heard it. A voice, faint but distinct. "Hello?" I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen. I told myself it was a TV next door or a passerby on the sidewalk, but then it came again, exactly 10 seconds later. "Hello?" It was a woman's voice. It sounded polite, almost professional, like someone waiting for a receptionist to return to their desk. I slid out of bed, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. I crept toward the front of the house, my heart beginning a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The hallway felt longer than usual. The air felt thinner. I reached the dining room, which has a large window overlooking the front porch. Martha doesn't have a peephole, so this was my only way to see. I reached for the plastic blinds, parting 2 slats just a fraction of an inch. She was standing right there. She wasn't a frail old woman. She looked to be in her late 50s, wearing a sensible beige trench coat. But she wasn't looking at the door. She was looking directly at the gap in the blinds, directly at me. She flashed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a jagged, performative expression. "Hello?" she said again, her eyes locked onto mine. I backed away, my skin crawling. Who stands on a porch at midnight and just says hello over and over? Why didn't she ring the bell? Why didn't she knock? I retreated to the guest room and locked the door, my breath coming in shallow, jagged gasps. I started texting my friends, my fingers shaking so hard I kept hitting the wrong keys. "There's a woman on the porch," I wrote. "She's just staring." My sister replied instantly, "Call Grandma." I looked at the clock. It was nearly 1 a.m. Martha would be sound asleep, her phone plugged in across the hotel room, probably on silent. Besides, what would I tell her? That a polite-sounding woman was standing on her porch? Silence returned. 5 minutes. 10. 20. I began to rationalize. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she had dementia and thought this was her home. I started to calm down, the adrenaline receding and leaving me with a cold, hollow exhaustion. Then, the house shook. It wasn't a knock. It was a frantic, open-palmed slamming against the guest room window, the one right next to my bed. The sound was deafening in the small room. I scrambled to the corner of the bed, my throat tight, a metallic taste filling my mouth. "Hello?" The voice boomed through the glass, no longer polite. It was urgent, demanding. Driven by a sudden, panicked burst of fight or flight, I lunged forward and shoved the blinds all the way up. We were inches apart. Her face was distorted, her skin looking like damp parchment in the moonlight. She wasn't trying to get in. She was just presenting herself. That horrific, wide smile remained fixed even as she slammed her hands against the glass. "I'm calling the police!" I screamed. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She just kept smiling, her eyes dancing with a terrifying, lucid intelligence. I didn't wait. I bolted from the room, sprinted up the stairs to the second floor, and locked myself in the attic storage room. I huddled under a pile of old quilts, my ears straining for the sound of breaking glass. I sat there for hours, staring at the door handle, waiting for it to turn. Why hadn't I actually called the police? Perhaps it was that lingering social pressure, the fear of overreacting to an older lady. Or maybe I was just paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of her face. Eventually, the sun began to bleed through the attic slats. I forced myself to go downstairs. I checked every window. The porch was empty. The garden was still. She was gone. I called Martha as soon as I thought she'd be awake. My voice was cracking as I described the woman in the beige coat. The silence on the other end of the line was worse than the banging. "Grandma?" I asked. Then she started screaming. It wasn't a cry of fear, it was a panicked, hysterical realization. She told me that 3 days before she left, a woman had followed her through the grocery store. A woman 10 years younger than her, wearing a beige coat, who did nothing but follow her down every aisle, smiling. Martha had dismissed it. She thought her mind was playing tricks on her. She thought she was just being an anxious old woman. "She followed me to the car, honey," Martha sobbed. "I thought I lost her at the lights." I hung up the phone and looked out at the empty street. The realization settled over me like a shroud. This woman didn't want to break in. She didn't want to steal. She had been waiting for Martha to be alone. And then she realized Martha wasn't the one in the house. I often wonder, if I hadn't looked through the blinds, if I hadn't made my presence known, would she have just kept saying hello until the sun came up? Or was she waiting for the moment the polite voice finally convinced me to open the door? Check your locks tonight. And if you hear a polite voice asking for you from the darkness, whatever you do, don't say hello back. If you enjoyed this story, a like is always appreciated. What would you have done in their place? Subscribe for more stories from the dark. My thumb hovered over the glowing screen of my phone, trembling so violently I could barely read the street names. The little blue dot, my exact location, was pulsing, emitting a silent, desperate beacon into the dark. The sound echoed from the other side of the rusted transit van I was crouched behind. Someone was walking through the empty parking lot. Someone who knew exactly where I was. You never think the digital breadcrumbs you leave behind will lead a predator right to your doorstep. It was late October, my first semester at a notoriously gritty university in upstate New York. I had just crawled out of the wreckage of my first real breakup. The isolation of a massive, unfamiliar campus was beginning to feel suffocating. Looking for a distraction, I downloaded a dating app. The endless swiping felt hollow until I matched with a girl named Chloe. She was a sophomore, bright-eyed, with blonde hair that fell in soft waves. Our conversations flowed with a rare, effortless rhythm. We dissected our favorite thriller novels and debated classic cinema. It felt incredibly genuine. So,
When I suggested catching a late showing at the indie theater downtown, her enthusiastic agreement felt like a victory. There was just one peculiar detail. She didn't want to meet at the theater or even by the well-lit campus gates. She provided a specific cross street for a residential intersection a few blocks off campus. She claimed she was borrowing her roommate's car and the side streets were easier to navigate. It made sense. At least the rational part of my brain desperately wanted it to make sense. I stood on the corner of Elm and 9th under a flickering amber streetlight. The autumn wind was sharp, biting through the thin fabric of my jacket. My phone vibrated in my palm. It was a message from Chloe, asking me to share my live location so she could time her arrival perfectly. Without a second thought, I tapped the button. 10 minutes passed. The surrounding houses were dark. The streets were dead quiet. Then, headlights washed over the cracked pavement. A dark, late-model sedan slowed to a crawl. It wasn't the compact hatchback I had pictured a college student driving. The vehicle idled a few feet from the curb. The tinted windows reflected the harsh glare of the street lamp, hiding the interior completely. I stepped forward, offering a tentative smile. But the silhouette in the driver's seat didn't belong to a blonde sophomore. It was a man. He looked to be in his late 60s. Deep lines carved into his face, thick gray hair neatly combed back. He wore a crisp, dark sweater over a collared shirt. He looked like a retired professor. He looked respectable, safe. "Good evening," he said, his voice a calm, gravelly baritone. "What brings a young man out to this quiet stretch all alone?" His polite, conversational tone disarmed me. "Just waiting for a friend," I replied, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. The man offered a warm, knowing smile. "Waiting for Chloe, by any chance?" The air in my throat suddenly felt thick and jagged. How could he possibly know her name? Before I could ask, he chuckled softly. "I'm her father. She told me she was meeting someone from that app. I hope you understand. I wasn't about to let my daughter pick up a stranger in the dark without vetting him first. Hop in. We'll go meet her." It sounded incredibly protective. The textbook behavior of a good parent. But something in the sterile, unblinking way he stared at me made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. A faint scent of stale tobacco and bitter chemical cleaner drifted from the open window. And then the illusion cracked. He was entirely too old to be her father. A grandfather, maybe. But more importantly, Chloe had explicitly stated she was borrowing a roommate's car. She never mentioned her family visiting. "I appreciate that, sir," I forced myself to say, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Why didn't she tell me you'd be picking me up?" The warm smile vanished. The muscles in his jaw tightened, pulling the skin taut over his cheekbones. He stared at me in heavy, suffocating silence. "I didn't trust you," he finally said, his tone dropping an octave. "Get in the car, Elias." Not a request, a directive. I didn't argue. I didn't say goodbye. I turned on my heel and began walking briskly in the opposite direction. Hey, wait!" he barked from the driver's seat, his polite facade entirely shattered. I braced for the sound of car doors opening. My pulse hammered violently against my eardrums. I kept walking, refusing to look over my shoulder, praying I wouldn't hear tires screeching in reverse. The sedan finally accelerated, drifting away down the avenue and turning left, disappearing behind a row of dark brick houses. I exhaled a shaky breath. The metallic taste of adrenaline coated the back of my tongue.
I needed to get back to the dorms.
I turned right at the next intersection, taking a route that cut through a dimly lit parallel street. Halfway down the block, a silhouette emerged from the shadows. It was the same dark sedan, parked flush against the curb, no headlights. The metal of the hood ticked softly as it cooled. The tinted windows were black voids. Was he inside, watching me approach? I kept my eyes forward, walking as casually as my trembling legs would allow. Then, a sudden weight in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from Chloe. "Why didn't you just get in the car with my dad? You're acting crazy." No concern, no confusion, just immediate clinical invalidation of my instincts. They were working together. Or worse, Chloe never existed at all. I broke into a dead sprint. The cold wind burned my lungs as I navigated the winding streets leading back to the university grounds. I didn't stop until I saw the familiar, brutalist architecture of my residence hall looming in the distance. I ducked into the faculty parking lot, gasping for air, leaning heavily against the side of a rusted transit van to hide myself. That was when I heard the glass crunch. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing through the rows of parked cars. How did he find me? The campus was sprawling. I had taken an erratic, unpredictable route. Then, the horrifying realization washed over me. I looked down at the glowing screen in my palm, the pulsing blue dot. I never stopped sharing my location. I was broadcasting my exact coordinates to the man hunting me in the dark. I peered around the rusted bumper of the van. The old man was 30 yards away, walking down the center of the lane. The polite, grandfatherly posture was completely gone. He walked with a stiff, predatory focus, his eyes scanning the gaps between the vehicles. "Come back," his voice echoed across the empty asphalt, devoid of any human warmth. "I'll take you to her." He was blocking the direct path to the dorm entrance. If I hesitated, he would close the distance. I shoved my phone in my pocket and bolted. I sprinted past the remaining cars, breaking out into the open courtyard. I didn't look back to see if he was chasing me. I just focused on the bright fluorescent lights of the dorm lobby doors. I crashed through the heavy entrance, swiping my student ID with violently shaking hands. I took the stairs 2 at a time and didn't stop running until I had thrown my weight against my door, locking the deadbolt behind me. My roommate was gone for the weekend. The silence of the empty room was deafening. I collapsed onto my bed, staring blindly at the ceiling, waiting for my jagged breathing to slow. Then, the screen on my nightstand lit up the dark room. A final message from the account I knew as Chloe. "You are a worthless coward. You're extremely lucky you run so fast. I would have loved to feel my hands close around your throat." I took a screenshot of the message. I replied that the police were being called, blocked the number, and locked my phone away in my desk. I kept the evidence. The police have the files now, though they admit a fake profile and an untraceable prepaid number leave them with very few concrete leads. They tell me I did the right thing. They tell me I'm safe now, behind locked doors and security cameras. But every time I look out my dorm window at the faculty parking lot below, I can't help but wonder if that dark sedan is out there, idling quietly in the shadows, just waiting for me to step off campus.